and thank you for joining me here today at Why the Book Wins. My name is Laura, and today's video is my May reading wrap-up. So I will be ranking the 9 books I read this month, and then the number 1 book for the month will go head-to-head with my current 2022 best book of the year, which is Power of the Dog. By the way, I recently got a first edition copy. It is right there. If you have seen my January monthly wrap-up, when I filmed that, I had just lost out on a bid for that first edition, and I was so sad. But here we are 5 months later, 4 months later, and I got an edition finally, so it was very exciting. It is a very rare book, so I'm so excited to finally have a first edition, especially since, as of right now, for the first 4 months of the year, possibly 5, you'll have to wait and see. It has been the best book that I've read all year so far, so very excited to have a first edition copy of it. But anyway, the 9 books that I read this year, I will post a picture of so you can see all of them. They are posted there chronologically from order in which I read them, but like I said, I will be talking about them from the one I liked the least to the one I liked the most. And we're not going to spend too much time dilly-dallying, although I will ask that you subscribe to my channel if you haven't subscribed yet, and you can follow me on Instagram, and you can join my Discord if you want to do a community book versus movie. I'm not going to do that unless there's interest in it, so we'll see how many people are interested through the Discord talking about it. So we'll see if a community book versus movie happens, because I need people to be wanting to join me in that, obviously. Anyway, I will link to Discord down below and to my Instagram and my Goodreads and all of that stuff. And yeah, let's just get right into it now. So my least favorite book of the month was Extremely Loud and Incredibly Close by Jonathan, I forget his last name now, but you can see it. It's right there. Anyway, this book was a request, and I always feel bad when it's a request and I end up not liking it, because I'm assuming someone requested it because they did like it. And there were people on Goodreads talking about this book, saying it was one of their all-time favorite books, and it did not do it for me. So I will, as a disclaimer, I will say that the book talks a lot about grief, because this boy's dad dies, and the dad was the person he was closest to. He has his grandma and his mom and his friends, but his dad was the person he was the closest to. I have not experienced grief like that. I've had people I care about die, but I haven't had someone super close to me that I loved, that I'd known my whole life, a close family member has never died. And so maybe on one hand, maybe I'd have been more touched by it had I experienced grief in that way. So I will say that. But real quick, this book, like I said, this boy's father dies, and sometime after his death, he finds a key in an envelope, and his dad would set him up, send him on these scavenger hunt adventure kind of things. And so he sees this key, and he thinks his dad, had set up some kind of adventure for him prior to his death. And so he goes out to try to figure out what this key goes to, and it's how he is able to stay connected to his dad even though his dad isn't around anymore. So that's the basic premise. And the first quarter of the book, I was enjoying it. We switch perspectives between the main character, Oscar, who is the boy, and we also hear the perspective of his grandma and his grandpa, so his dad's parents. We hear their stories as well. And I enjoyed the different perspectives for the most part. But yeah, something at some point between a quarter of the way through and halfway through, I was just losing so much interest, and I kind of stopped caring. And it's not that I found the characters annoying. I just kind of stopped caring at a certain point, and I was like, man, just get to the point already. And at the halfway point, I considered just stopping and not finishing, but I powered through and I finished it. And I read this one because the Audible, I could have got it on Audible, but I didn't want to pay for it. So I was waiting for Libby, but Libby, the wait was too long, and so it was never available for me. So I had to read it. So yeah, ultimately I just lost interest. And also this book tries too hard to be profound at times, in my opinion. And so rather than being touched by these profound observations on life, I just found myself rolling my eyes at a lot of it. There are some touching scenes, in regards to the dad's death and the family, but even then I didn't feel it as much as I would have liked. And for the most part, I just felt myself not feeling much of anything as I read this book. And so I finished the book, and I was going to do a book versus movie for it, even though I didn't love the book. And so I started the movie, but then I never finished the movie, and I realized I don't want to spend time on this story, if I'm being honest. I don't want to spend any more time on it than I already had. And if I'd finished the movie, that's, another hour of my time, plus the time it takes to write up my outline and my post, and then film the video, and then edit the video. And I suddenly realized I just did not want to spend any more time on this story than I already had, and I stopped the movie, and I will not be doing a book versus movie for it. Although I will say one difference is that in the book, you get the grandpa and grandma's perspective, as I said, whereas the movie totally leaves that out. But yeah, so ultimately it just came across kind of pretentious even at times, and a bit too, like I said, trying too hard to be profound, in my opinion. And yeah, I gave it 2 stars or 2.5 stars. I think 2 stars is probably the more fitting one for me. But that was my least favorite book of the month. Moving on, the rest of the books I'm talking about, I gave 3.5 stars or higher. So the rest of these were decent books. The next one, number 8 on the list, is Firestarter by Stephen King. I have my first edition right there. But this one, I enjoyed it. It just, some of Stephen King's books have just really gotten to me personally and just had an effect on me. And this was not one of them. I was interested and engaged, and I cared what happened, and I was curious what would happen. And it was an interesting plot, and there were some really cool scenes that the movie did not deliver on. Which, by the way, if you want to check out my Firestarter book first movie, I compare the book with the 80s movie as well as the new movie. And I like the new movie more than most people. It's gotten terrible reviews, which I don't see myself watching it again anytime soon. Maybe I would never watch it again. I don't know. It's not high on my rewatch list. However, I didn't dislike it as much as so many other people did. So anyway, if you want to hear a more positive review for that movie, you should check out my video for it. So I really enjoyed the book. I just didn't love it, and I wasn't moved by it, hence the lower rating. So it's probably my least favorite Stephen King, but again, it's 3.5 stars, so that certainly isn't bad. Also, John Rainbird, the villain, I thought was a bit cliche. Maybe at the time he was more original, but at this point, the villain who is basically a psychopath because he has no feelings, he doesn't have empathy, he is very, slowly plotting and patient, and is willing to put in the time to get what he wants, and he has this weird obsession with death. And all of those things just came across as cliche and something that's been done a number of times at this point, it seems. So I didn't find him the most interesting villain, personally. But anyway, I enjoyed the book though. And it's not horror. There are some violent scenes, but it's not horror. So I don't think you would be scared reading this book. So yeah, Firestarter, 3.5 stars. Next up, this book I gave 3.5 stars as well, and that is The Beguiled by Thomas Cullinan. And this one is about a Union soldier who is injured in the South, and there is this girls' school who is run by these 2 teachers. So it's 2 teachers and then 5 girls attending the school. And it's during the Civil War, so these 5 girls all have different reasons for being there. They just don't have family to go to. Anyway, they find this wounded soldier, bring him in, and then we just have this tense story about he's not trapped, but he is injured. And it's called The Beguiled because he beguiles them, but then they also beguile him, and it's kind of going both ways. And even though I loved the story, I feel it could have been done better though, because I talk about this in my episode. This book first movie will be out in a month, the end of June. But there were so many scenes that could have been great, but we're not told about them. We're told about it after the fact. And it's what? Why are you telling us about it? Oh yeah, and by the way, this happened. No, don't tell us after the fact. Tell us in the moment, because that could have been such a great, tense, powerful scene. And the author was a playwright, so I think that's part of the reason where maybe he wasn't used to writing out the details of a scene, because it's on the actors to play the scene out, right? So that is one big complaint I had with the book. But I did enjoy it. It wasn't as tense as I wanted it to be either, but I still really enjoyed the premise, and I feel it had a lot of promise to it, and it was a very intriguing story, and I didn't know how it was going to end. There is very obvious, a Chekhov's gun type of thing where it's so obvious that that's going to come into play later. So I guessed how it would end, and I was right. But still, I didn't actually know for sure how it would end. And so I really enjoyed the story as it got to the end for the most part, despite my complaints about it. But it gets a 3.5 star because of all the reasons I said. But I would still recommend it. Yeah, let's move on to the next one. So number 6 and 5 on the list are both of the kids' books I read this month, Holes by Louis Satcher and Matilda by Roald Dahl. And these two, I put Matilda as 6 and Holes as 5, but I don't know, they are a bit more interchangeable. I'm not really sure. I gave them both 4 stars. So they both get 4 stars. I don't know which one I liked better. I think Matilda is better for a younger audience. As an adult, I still enjoyed it, but you could have like a young child read Matilda and they would enjoy it and it would be appropriate. Holes, I think like 10 and up is a good age for Holes because it does cover some more grown-up topics, but it does it in a kid-friendly way. But Matilda, one of my favorite things about Matilda is that you have so many incredible female characters in that. And so I think it's so important, not only for girls to read books with strong female characters, but it's important for boys to read books like that too. So this is one I would highly recommend for young children to read. Holes, like most of those characters are male. We do have the warden and we have the story of Kate as well. But for the most part, it's a story about boys. A lot of the characters are boys. But it's still a great story, so well done. Like I said, it covers some more grown-up topics, but it does it in a child-friendly way, and it's just a good way to get kids thinking about these topics and coming to their parents and asking them about it and getting the conversation going, essentially. But yeah, my book first movie for Holes will be out the middle of June, and then Matilda is the week after Holes. Matilda is, of course, about a girl who is very smart and her parents don't care about her, but then she attends a school and the teacher can see how brilliant Matilda is. And Matilda, at some point, starts to develop like telekinetic. Is that telekinetic, where you can move things? I think it is. Anyway, she can move and lift things, and then it helps her get revenge on the bad people in her life and at school. And then Holes is about a boy who is sent to a juvenile correctional camp where they dig a hole each day. And then there is just a lot that unfolds there where there's this treasure and this family curse. And yeah, it was really great. And the movie is amazing. So watch my book first movies for both of those. Number 4 on the list is Joe, and this again had 4 stars. This is by Larry Brown, and this is a story about a guy, which my book first movie was out. I believe I'll be posting this video on Thursday, which means my book first movie for Joe came out yesterday, so you can check that out. The movie stars Nicolas Cage and Ty Sheridan, directed by David Gordon Green, and the movie is fantastic. So good. But the book was also very good. So much from the movie was taken straight out of the book, but it is about Joe Ransom, and he's definitely a gray character. And he takes this kid named Gary under his wing because Gary comes from an abusive family. And so Joe becomes this role model in Gary's life, even though, like I said, Joe isn't the perfect role model. But still, his heart is softened towards Gary, and they form this really sweet bond, and he looks after him. And then, yeah, it's just about the life of these people. And it's an intense book, and it's an intense movie. But the movie was even more intense for me, and the movie was just more emotional and powerful. I also saw the movie first, so maybe I'm biased, but I did really love the book. And yeah, so many things from the movie were straight from the book. So I was impressed by that. And Larry Brown is a fantastic writer. Like at times it's just a very simple, straightforward way of writing. And the dialogue is very simple and straightforward. But he also has sections that were just so powerfully written. So I definitely want to read more Larry Brown. And this is one I would recommend. Next up, it's a self-help book, and that is Better Than Happy. I gave this 5 stars, but it feels weird ranking it among all of these fiction books, or even if they're nonfiction. Like this one is not story-based at all. It's a self-help book. But I really enjoyed it. And Jody Moore is someone whose podcast I have listened to off and on for the last few years. And she has had some just great ideas and tools to implement in your own life and great ways to see life and to enjoy life better and to get rid of negative habits you might have. And yeah, I really loved it. Like I said, I made a self-help video about things I've learned from self-help. If you want to check that out, I will link to it. But like I said in that video, Jody Moore is a Christian, and she talks about that a fair amount. So if you're not a Christian and if you don't like hearing about that, this isn't the book for you. But if you don't mind that, then you should definitely check this one out because I learned a lot from Jody Moore and this was a great book. So number 2 and number 1 for this month, I still don't know which is number 1 and which is number 2. I go back and forth all the time. So I'm just going to cheat and say that they are tied, but that is Dolores Claiborne by Stephen King and The Last House on Needless Street by Catriona Ward, I believe is how you say her name. I own first editions for both of these. There's Dolores Claiborne and Needless Street is down there. But anyway, Dolores Claiborne is about a woman named Dolores, and she is being questioned for the murder of this lady who she worked for. And throughout the story, we find out that she did not kill this woman, but how she did kill her husband decades prior. And so we learn the details of her relationship with this woman she worked for, as well as the details of why and how she killed her husband. And it's also written in a very unique way where it's just Dolores talking. And so everything that's written is just what Dolores says as she gives her, what's the word? I always forget this word. Like, it's not an inquest. As she gives her report, there's like a more official word for it, but she's meeting with the police, and so she's telling them her story. And so even when she breaks from her story and is talking to the people in the room, we only hear her side of the conversation. We don't hear what the policemen are saying to her, if that makes sense. So unique for a Stephen King book in some ways. Again, not horror. This one would be like a psychological thriller. And I loved it because, again, just great female characters. And we do have her husband, obviously, is a male character, but the other female characters, her daughter Selena, and then the woman she works for, Vera, then Dolores herself. So I loved that. And yeah, this book, like, there aren't necessarily twists and turns. It keeps you on the edge of your seat, and there are scenes that are just very intense, but it's not one that relies on like plot twists necessarily. It's just telling you the story of Dolores and what she's done in her relationships. And yeah, I just loved it so much. I love the character of Dolores and even the character of Vera to some extent. And it was such a simple story in some ways, like especially comparing it to Needless Street, which, to talk about that one, I feel like I can't say too much, but it's about this woman who is looking for her sister who has been missing for like 10 years now. Along with that, we also hear the story of this guy who lives in this house, who lives in the last house on Needless Street. And then he owns a cat, and we get things from the cat's perspective as well. And that's really all I can say. But this one is a book where one of the reasons I liked it is because there are like so many turns and reveals, and you're just like, oh my gosh, like by the end of the book, like my mind was blown. I could not believe it. And it is just put together so well. She clearly did her research for this book. It's just such a well-written book. And yeah, she obviously put so much time into piecing this story together and wanting to give certain people the right kind of representation. It can be a hard one to read. There are some tough topics addressed in this, specifically child abuse. But yeah, it was such a good book. I read both of these books in like 2 days. I read both of them pretty quickly, but I think Needless Street, it's not like an edge of your seat book, but as you're reading it, which I talk about this book in my Weird Books by Women Authors, but there's just so many different things you're given that you're like, how does this make sense? What is going on right now? And so it keeps you reading because you want to make sense of these random things that are being told to you. Whereas Dolores Claiborne, it made sense as I was reading it. It was just a very engaging book that I had a hard time putting down. So yeah, both of them very different, but I love them both. And I don't know which one I like better. It's really hard to choose. Yeah, I honestly don't know. They're both 5 stars, obviously. I'm tempted to say Needless Street is the #1 book for the month, but Dolores Claiborne was fantastic though. I loved it so much. I talked about Firestarter just wasn't one that got to me, whereas Dolores Claiborne is one that I was like, wow, like that made an impact on me. So yeah, I loved both of them. I don't know, I can't pick which is best. And that brings me to deciding if either of these 2 books beats out The Power of the Dog, which is the current 2022 champion. And man, this is hard. Like, I finished these 2 books like a week or 2 ago. I finished Dolores Claiborne like maybe 2 weeks ago, and Needless Street was shortly after. Yeah, I think I read Needless Street right after Dolores Claiborne. But so I've had time to think about it, and it has not helped me because I still just, these 3 books, I mean, Power of the Dog is so different from Dolores Claiborne and Needless Street, but they're also good. Power of the Dog is one where, like I said, the ending, I was just like, wow, I cannot believe it. Same with Needless Street, where as things unfolded and came to the end, I was just like, oh my gosh. Whereas Dolores Claiborne didn't have that effect on me. Like, by the time I got to the end, like, I wasn't shocked. I was just like, wow, like, what a great story and what great characters. But it's not like I was shocked necessarily. But yeah, this is tough. Part of me, because Power of the Dog has been winning every month so far, part of me just wants to shake things up and name a different one as the winner. But Power of the Dog was really good and just amazing characters, which honestly, as I'm talking about this right now, I'm now I'm thinking I like Dolores Claiborne better than Needless Street, so maybe this is more between Dolores Claiborne and Power of the Dog. It might be easier for me to just be like, okay, Power of the Dog still wins. That way I don't need to choose necessarily between Needless Street and Dolores Claiborne, and those two can remain tied. Yeah, this is really tough. Comment down below if you've read any of these 3 books and let me know your thoughts. Maybe I still don't know what I'm gonna end up saying by the end of this video, but reading people's comments after the fact might help me decide. But I think for now, I am going to say that Power of the Dog is still the 2022 winner. I'm gonna reread that though, because it's important to me that a book holds up on a second reread. And sometimes a second reread, I change my opinions on it. So I'm gonna read Power of the Dog again in June. And so we will see if it still holds up, because it's been a little while since I've read it at this point, because it was beginning of January. So, I mean, I'm saying Power of the Dog wins, but I'm very hesitant to say that because Dolores Claiborne really was so amazing. Highly recommend. It's one people don't talk about. So I think there's that too, where because it is a more underrated Stephen King, that I went into not really having any expectations, and I was just like, oh my gosh, this is so good. Now I'm tempted to say Dolores Claiborne is the new 2022 winner. But then when I say that, I'm like, was it really that good though? Does it deserve to be the new 2022 champion? I don't know. I mean, I loved it. I'm taking way too long to debate about this, obviously. I'm just gonna say Power of the Dog is still the winner. And then as I give it a reread, and then maybe for my June monthly wrap up, or at some point I'll be like, you know what, I was wrong. You know, it should have been Dolores Claiborne this month, or it should have been Needless Street. But I've had time to think about it and I still haven't been able to decide. So giving myself even more time isn't a guarantee that I'll be able to decide, because I've had like 2 weeks now to think about it and I haven't been able to make up my mind. But yeah, I'm gonna go with Power of the Dog though. And yeah, I guess that wraps it up. So thank you for watching this video. Again, if you have read any of these books, let me know in the comments down below. Again, if you are someone who likes Extremely Loud and Incredibly Close, I apologize. I hope I didn't come across as too harsh towards that book. It just didn't do it for me personally. It is about September 11th though, because that's how his dad dies, which is kind of like a reveal. But in the summary, it talks about September 11th. So then I was surprised when I read the book that it's something that's like revealed at some point. But anyway, so it did bring back memories of that day. And so those were the parts that made me feel more emotional, is when it was more specific with the dad's death and with that day. Because yeah, I was old enough that I was in school when that happened and I remember it very clearly. But yeah, so I don't want to hate on that book too much. So if you like it, I apologize if I sounded too harsh. But if you have read Dolores Claiborne, Needless Street, Power of the Dog, those ones in particular, comment down below. Let me know your thoughts. And let me know your thoughts on The Beguiled. Are you excited for my book first movie? That's like, I haven't filmed it yet and I'm excited to film it. It's going to be a longer one because I have a lot to say in regards to the book and the 2 movie adaptations. But yeah, I'll wrap it up. Thank you for watching. Don't forget to subscribe, like this video, and I will see you next time. Bye.